Hello and welcome to some more Star Citizen. So we are going to be delving into the CIG account of what happened with Alpha 3.18, that first patch of the year, what they learnt from that, the issues they had with persistent entity streaming and other features, and what they plan to do differently in the future. The video will contain a load of my thoughts too, because I lived through that broken patch, and we'll be covering the 3.19 patch in a different video. 3.18's launch. As many of our players experienced, we launched Alpha 3.18 on March 10th, 2023, and alongside a bevy of high-profile new features like Salvage, the Vulture Salvager, the surprise Scorpius Antares, new rivers and new missions, the biggest headliner of the patch was our persistent entity streaming, PES, which completely rewrote how we save state in the game and ushered in the beginning of the promise of a truly persistent universe where a player's actions could remain in the game for others to interact with and create a lived-in environment where you could literally leave your mark in the persistent universe. And just as importantly, PES was the necessary final stepping stone to deliver static server meshing. Obviously, we still don't have that in-game yet. That's what's planned for Alpha 4.0. Many who follow Star Citizen appreciate how consequential and important our delivery of Alpha 3.18 was for us and the game itself. Many teams at CIG spent most of the second half of last year finishing out persistent entity streaming as we deployed it to our public test universe servers for testing in December 2022, and then spent the next 3 months attempting to harden and improve it for launching to our Star Citizen live service as quickly as possible. However, when the moment of truth came and 3.18 shipped to live, the shock to the system was beyond what we had projected. While it's true that we expected persistent entity streaming to create a rough experience initially as we ironed out the issues that could only expose themselves at massive scale, and we warned as much, to say that we were surprised by the depth of chaos from the persistent entity streaming launch would be an understatement. So yeah, basically 3.18 largely broke the game and made it mostly unplayable for most people. So the first sort of 5 months of the year or so, we had a very unplayable Star Citizen patch. The patch was hugely anticipated. When the patch dropped on March 10th, they had the highest peaks ever for login per minute and per hour, and the highest attempted number of logins per day that Star Citizen's ever seen for the first few days. Or at least attempted logins, because the patch and login servers were largely broken. Infinite loading screens, loads of queues that would never end. It took Cloud Imperium weeks, if not months, to expose, diagnose, and create fixes for all of the issues that they had with persistent entity streaming and it going to live. And the sort of forces were multiplicative. Cloud Imperium went on to say, "We learned a lot from the launch of persistent entity streaming, and while we're still recovering and regret the compromised service in the first few days and weeks of the rollout, it has definitely taught us a valuable lesson to value and preserve the integrity of the service more than we had in the past, and that's why we began to roll out the replication layer split and crash recovery, two things now enabled by persistent entity streaming. We're going to be doing this gradually, and as we begin to deliver server meshing, we will create dedicated testing channels to harden those new technologies further and implement standards and thresholds before we graduate them to the PTU and then live. You'll start to see the ramifications of that later in the year and hear more from us later about how our new approach to deploying potentially disruptive and game-changing new tech to the game service, but it comes down to us truly trying to commit to preserving the experience for hundreds of thousands, if not millions, who now play Star Citizen as a live service game, albeit an alpha still in development. Now, I'm concerned only lightly by what they mean by this. Does this mean additional length to development time? Is this going to be a slowing of processes as they try and polish stuff out? What are these new processes is what I'm trying to say. It might be, actually, this is great, this is very sensible, because yeah, we do have a live service that Cloud Imperium are running, and I don't want the alpha patches that we are on to be steps backwards rather than forwards. I want every time they release a new patch to live for it to be better than the last one. 3.18, not better than the last one. It was unplayable, but it was essential. Getting persistent entity streaming in was essential. More testing channels, stuff like that going on, does make more sense. The balancing act Cloud Imperium are having to do here is pretty hard, but let's see what their sort of new processes and stuff are. Sometimes a lot of this stuff is sort of marketing speak, or let's just give them something, because we've had stuff with like staggered development before, and the new way they do roadmaps where they don't really show us too much, but they're like refining bits through the Squadron 42 branch before coming into my hands. A lot of this stuff is, well, you're effectively going to be getting less or stuff slower. I mean, it's not necessarily that, but, you know, that's my concern. Anyway, let's delve into some of these features in some more detail with what went well, what didn't go well, and what Cloud Imperium learnt and are going to be doing differently next time. Persistent entity streaming. What went well? The development of persistent entity streaming involved a diverse strike team of programmers with specialized skills from multiple areas across the core tech group and Turbulent. This collaboration was crucial in successfully building this complex system. The initial deployment of this to the PTU, the Public Test Universe, and testing with the PT community went well, setting a positive foundation for further improvements. However, this led to issues. So what didn't go well? The research and development aspects of PES posed challenges, requiring the engineers to invent ways around unforeseen problems due to foundational nature of persistent entity streaming, integrating it into Star Citizen's game code. This resulted in significant changes that disrupted the game at a very low level, and some game teams were unprepared for the integration effort required to bring the game systems back to parity or to convert and leverage the new persistence layer for existing features. Issues with the changes introduced by persistent entity streaming only became apparent during large-scale use and under high player load, which caused delays in identifying and resolving problems, and features not thought to use persistence at all became affected by trivial delays, like tram systems, spawn queues, and others. So yeah, we had problems where ASOP terminals weren't working, the trams and the public transport and elevators, they weren't working, NPCs weren't spawning properly. They also underestimated the live operations compared to PTU operations. Basically, they just had a huge amount of people trying to log into their services and play the game and that sort of stuff, and they were unprepared for that. Regarding vehicles, persistent entity streaming heavily modified the way they are entitled and created in-game, giving them a better user experience and significantly reducing the size of inventory and global database size for ships that are never used. But there were major problems with databases connecting with persistent entity streaming and requests response cycles, heavy queuing. This caused massive instability to 3.18 and 3.18x patches. There were periodic stops to the inventory system, so that means you couldn't sort of access or use your inventories. Interesting as well, in the engine, several shards reached previously unknown hard limits of maximum numbers of allocated entities, forcing the teams to seed and create new shards and cycle them out, diluting the effect of persistence on those shards. So when we talk about persistence and persistent entity streaming, what we're talking about is the ability to leave objects in a location and for that locational information to be saved about those objects. So you can leave a weapon in the middle of a desert and it will still be there when you come back to it later. But the way that shards work at the moment, you might not necessarily get back into the same server effectively that you were in previously. Cloud Imperium also talk about some accounts being bricked and problems with players getting stuck in a shard or infinite loading, character creation causing loads of problems. Things I'll do better and future plans. Going forward, we'll finalize and use the new Cloud Test Launcher to adequately stress test the game shards at scale. This tool will simulate player behaviors and allow QA and the engineers to connect multiple modified game clients to the shard. By utilizing cloud computing resources, effective stress testing can be conducted, which will help identify and address issues relating to heavily loaded servers before moving to live. The team responsible for persistent entity streaming has now moved on to static server meshing and are embracing a transformation approach to the new project. Unlike PES, the foundational technology for this can be integrated into the code base gradually, avoiding a disruptive Big Bang approach. Parts of server meshing tech are already available to the game team for testing compatibility with their game features. Combined with the Cloud Test Launcher, this approach aims to facilitate a smoother integration process for static server meshing. By implementing these measures, we aim to enhance our testing capabilities and mitigate integration challenges, ensuring smoother delivery of foundational technologies while minimizing disruption to the game. That's awesome that they basically answered my earlier question there. I did want to know what the new processes were for making sure that the game is stable and testing that they're going to be doing before going live, and is it going to add a load more time or anything? It doesn't sound like it's going to add a load more time. It sounds like they've got tools now that they've developed that will actually allow them to stress test and do a load of the automated testing to make sure everything is working at scale that they basically didn't have before. So yeah, persistent entity streaming it almost broke Star Citizen entirely. I mean, it left us with a barely playable game for several months. but 3.19.1 did hugely fix most stuff, and 3.20 looks like it is a genuine polish and talk patch where the game's going to be very, very playable, and it's a nice platform for them to then release server meshing 4.0 eventually. Are we getting a 3.21 patch by the end of the year? That's what it looks like. Potentially then 4.0 early next year. There were a load of other features, obviously, in 3.18 as well, and let's go over some of them quickly. Rivers look absolutely fantastic. They are a step towards roads as well, same sort of similar technology for the procedural placement of that, and yeah, they look pretty good. Load of improvements they made to them, and sort of like the way canyons and the way they cut through the terrain. However, the actual procedural tool for river placement wasn't in as good a state as they wanted, and a lot of manual effort was required to actually get rivers in properly. It just wasn't hitting the level of quality they wanted with the automated tools. So they're improving the tools for this, and they say, although there's still considerable work ahead before we can consistently create planetary landscapes with rivers that look and feel like the real deal, we have made substantial progress and are now much closer to achieving our goal than ever before. So it does sound like, yes, they're procedural river tools much better, but there is still going to be some manual processing of rivers, and they're going to have to check them out to make sure they're up to spec. Sand caves. They're really happy with the way that sand caves look, and their sort of first foray into very specific biome-based caves. However, the tools necessary for actually automating this weren't ready, so they had to go through all the caves and do them manually, and they weren't released with missions, so they were new locations without much functionality, although you could mine in them and stuff like that. They're currently in the final stages of refining the new visuals for rock caves, which will serve as the next archetype, and they look forward to utilising the location tool to construct a wider variety of cave systems and have this procedurally assisted, because basically Cloud Imperium go, let's generate a cave. Oh, that cave looks... Let's generate 100 of them. These caves look appropriate for these areas. Boop, and then put them in, and then jostle them around a little bit. At least that's the dream. They're also working towards support for bigger connections, rooms, and entrances, which is a key requirement before they can replace the old caves fully. Racing and time trial stuff, they were actually quite happy that they were able to get this stuff in, updating tracks, giving a bit of analysis of how the tracks work, and giving them an idea of how to build tracks in the future. But due to poor server performance and analytics showing that players didn't actually unlock the next track, shows that not enough players were actually doing the sort of time trial experience, or weren't performing well enough to actually get to the second track. So they're obviously making tweaks to that. The PTV Golf Buggy Racetrack. So apparently this was created very quickly, and they wanted a simple location, short time frame, minimal impact on other teams. Bam, build a modular kit for kart-style racetracks. It was apparently sort of ready technically before 3.17 was released, but they needed to sort of go through QA passes and bug fixing and that sort of stuff. They have other ground-based tracks in the works, and will be building them in this modular nature. They might be part of missions and rewards and sort of racing system. They were happy with all the updates with Security Post Korea. However, the missions there still were rough around the edges and needed ironing out, and are still in the process of being improved. They're also trying to work out player participation and motivation sort of metrics and all that sort of stuff to work out how to get them involved with different activities. And they said they continue to iterate on sandbox activity and locations based on feedback they've received, and add further analytics to better understand participation. Jumptown, they updated the location, actually works and looks a lot better now. Persistent entity streaming did cause a lot of issues around the location though. They did want to update the whole area using Rastar, which they weren't able to at that time. They did say for the next run of global events, they're planning to redrop the locations on different planets to give different gameplay. For example, in thick atmosphere, higher gravity planets, and forests. The currently disabled infiltrate missions on Horizon, they were apparently well received, but they turned them off in 3.19 because they wanted to run Siege of Horizon, but they weren't able to move these locations and missions away from that area. But they've now sort of moved those locations to other areas, and they will be able to run Siege of Horizon and those new platform missions potentially in 3.20 cycle. It will be like a 3.20.x patch. Prison activity updates. The prison escape mission is apparently surprisingly well played and offers a new way for players to clear their crime stats inside the prison. Loot on the AI and new selling terminals were well received. Players felt the new AI made the prison feel more alive and gave them another way to sort of earn merits. What didn't go so well, the Urza rover continues to spawn underground. Selling items at prison costs still isn't reliable, and excessive AI are being spawned due to a spawn closet issue. The Drake Vulture, people really enjoyed using it for the salvage gameplay loop. They got the ship feature-wise into a good state before releasing. However, there were complaints around the traverse of the ship and players having to have a lot of manual input in actually moving the sort of salvage crates out of the back of their ship onto the cargo grid. They said they're going to continue to try to release ships along with their gameplay loops rather than earlier in the project if the gameplay loop isn't done. The Scorpius Antares released, but it was a bit of a weird ship because they went the sort of co-pilot just gets access to like an EMP, which might be relatively boring. And they said basically in the future, co-pilots will have more things to do. With master modes and the new MFDs, multifunction displays coming, they don't want the experience for a co-pilot to be boring, basically. Salvage and cargo updates sort of went into the game. Unfortunately, the scope of salvage was drastically underestimated. Really, they need to go over all of the ships and apply an updated damage system to them. Otherwise, you won't be able to 100% sort of salvage a ship properly. They said they're now more closely integrated with teams working on big features like this, so issues can be found and investigated before development properly starts, rather than being looped in once the prototype has been completed. Basically, that UV2 damage system that they were using wasn't suitable out of the box. They went on to talk more specifically about hull scraping, and basically, not all vehicles could be upgraded to the new damage map in time, meaning some vehicles still don't work correctly with hull scraping, but the addition of an expansive, quite meaty chunk of gameplay was pretty well received and is a relatively large milestone. They also reiterated that downstream teams are going to get involved as early as the prototyping stage now to make sure that they don't require additional unforeseen work at the end of a feature's development. Boom! That's it for your post-mortem for the Alpha 3.18 patch. So yes, I'm relatively happy with that. Obviously it took us ages to get the post-mortem for that. Cloud Imperium identifying a lot of the issues that they sort of faced. Stuff that they did poorly there, stuff that they can then learn from and do better next time. A lot of the stuff there they've largely fixed and addressed now, but it was really good for them to sort of address the persistent entity streaming and sort of long delays of 3.18, also then going into the live build just being pretty unplayable. Persistent entity streaming genuinely almost broke the game fully. I mean, it did kind of break the game, but it does look like Cloud Imperium have learnt from that, and static server meshing, when it hopefully comes in the next couple of patches, hopefully early next year. With Alpha 4.0, we should see the game being in a much better state, even with the deployment of that sort of new tech compared to what we saw with 3.18's launch, and it may be quite possible that once they release that patch, actually it's in a very good state because they've gone through a vigorous testing cycle. At least that is my hope. Anyway, I'm really interested to know what you think. What were your thoughts of 3.18 at the time? Was it like, oh god, everything's broken? Do you think Cloud Imperium, with that post-mortem, you can see that they've learnt the lessons and understood what went wrong, and you're more trusting them going forward in the future? Do you think there are elements of 3.18 that they didn't address there, or did you not like some of the stuff they said? Do you think that 3.18 is going to be the last of the super broken patches that we get in our hands? Or do you think, yes, static server meshing, dynamic server meshing, those patches have the potential to really break the game for a long time? Do you think Cloud Imperium do have to sort of maintain this live, very playable build, and when stuff like that breaks for the live builds, well, that's a concern? Or is it just important that they push ahead with tech, knowing that eventually they'll be able to polish everything and get a live build out, a version 1 of the game? That's the sort of most important thing. What are your thoughts? I'd love to hear from you in the comments below, and we will be covering the 3.19 postmortem soon. NordVPN is amazing and you should buy it. It's so useful, it's easier to tell you what it can't do. NordVPN can't do your taxes. Nord, how much do I owe for VAT? NordVPN can't help you buy more spaceships. Nord, add a terrapin to my shopping cart. NordVPN can't cook for you. No, my cabbages! And NordVPN can't be your girlfriend. Can't or won't NordVPN, if that is your real name. NordVPN.com/BoredGamer will help you connect to the internet more safely, securely, and anonymously, with greater access to the content you want. But can I teach it to love? Links below for the best NordVPN deals around. Every month we have a ship giveaway, and for September, that's for the Drake Corsair, that fantastic exploration ship. Not only will you be able to explore the verse with it, but the ship is perfectly competent at a huge range of gameplay and is a fantastic mission running ship. You can use it for cargo, you can put some vehicles in there. It's reasonably good in a fight, one of the true multi-role, multi-crew ships. To be in for a chance of winning one of those, just comment on any of my videos made during the month. More details down below. Also down below are links to be able to support the channel more. There's the join button, making you one of my elite channel members. You'll get occasional exclusive content. There's also YouTube badges and emotes to show your support. There's also Patreon for those of you that prefer that. We try to mirror the rewards on there as well. But just people liking, subscribing and sharing these videos goes a long way. A heartfelt thank you to everyone that watched the video. I hope you have a great September and I'll see you in the verse.